The room fell silent for a moment before my sister Victoria's laughter pierced the air like shattered glass. I sat there, my fingers trembling slightly as I traced the edge of the leather chair, watching the dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows. My sister had just inherited $200,000, the beach house in Martha's Vineyard, and grandmother's entire jewelry collection. And me? I got an old typewriter that probably didn't even work anymore. A typewriter? Victoria's voice dripped with mock sympathy as she turned to face me, her newly inherited diamond earrings catching the light. How fitting. You always were grandmother's little charity case, weren't you? The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably, shuffling his papers, but said nothing. No one ever said anything when Victoria spoke to me like that. They never had. If you're still watching, it's because you know what it feels like to be the one who's always overlooked, always underestimated. Stay with me, because what I found in that typewriter changed everything. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, you need to hear how this story ends. Please, if this resonates with you already, hit that like button and let me know in the comments that you're listening. Your support means everything. My name is Emma Sinclair, and for 23 years, I was the family disappointment. The one who dropped out of law school to pursue writing. The one who worked at a bookstore while my sister climbed the corporate ladder at our father's investment firm. The one who sat at the children's table at family dinners well into my 20s because, as Victoria loved to remind everyone, Emma never quite grew up, did she? But grandmother was different. While everyone else saw my career choice as a failure, she would sit with me for hours in her study, listening to my stories, encouraging my dreams. Words have power, Emma, she would say, her weathered hands moving across the keys of that very typewriter. More power than money could ever have. Remember that. I thought those were just the kind words of a loving grandmother trying to make her struggling granddaughter feel better. I had no idea how literal she was being. The walk back to my apartment that day felt longer than usual. I carried the typewriter in its original case, the weight of it pulling at my shoulder as I navigated the crowded sidewalks. My phone buzzed incessantly, Victoria sending pictures of her inheritance to our family group chat. "Look at grandmother's sapphire necklace. It's worth more than Emma's annual salary," read one message. Our cousins replied with heart emojis and congratulations. No one asked about the typewriter. No one asked about me. My apartment was a far cry from Victoria's penthouse. A studio in Queens, barely 500 square feet, with windows that faced a brick wall and radiators that clanged like ghost chains in the winter. But it was mine, paid for with my own money from the bookstore, and that meant something to me. I set the typewriter case on my small dining table, really just a card table I'd found at a yard sale, and stared at it for a long moment before opening the latches. The typewriter was beautiful, I had to admit. Black lacquer body with gold lettering, keys that seemed to glow like pearls in the dim light of my apartment. It looked almost new, despite being over 80 years old. Grandmother had taken meticulous care of it. As I lifted it from the case, a small envelope fell out, landing on the floor with a whisper. My name was written across it in grandmother's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of her personal stationery, the expensive kind, with her monogram embossed at the top. The message was brief. "Emma, my dear one, the story begins where the ribbon ends. Look closer than they ever did. All my love, Grandmother Rose." The ribbon. I examined the typewriter's ribbon, black and seemingly ordinary, but as I unwound it carefully, holding it up to the light, I could see something. Faint impressions, like ghosts of words typed long ago. My heart began to race as I realized what I was looking at. Every letter typed on this machine had left an impression on the ribbon, and if I could read it backwards, starting from the end. I spent the next 3 hours painstakingly transcribing the faint impressions, using a magnifying glass I borrowed from my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen. The first words I managed to decipher made my blood run cold. "If you are reading this, Emma, then I am gone, and the truth can finally be told." What followed was a story that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Grandmother Rose hadn't inherited her fortune from my grandfather, as everyone believed. She had earned it herself, building a publishing empire under a male pseudonym in the 1950s when no one would take a female publisher seriously. The company, Ashford Publishing House, had published some of the most influential books of the 20th century, and she had been forced to hide her role in it for decades. "Your grandfather was a kind man," the ribbon message continued, "but he was also weak. When his business failed in 1963, I saved us from bankruptcy with my publishing profits. But the world wasn't ready for a woman to be the breadwinner, especially not in our social circle. So we maintained the fiction that the money came from his investments. I let him take credit for my work, my success, my entire life's achievement, because I loved him and because I wanted to protect our family from scandal. Had to stop reading several times, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't hold the magnifying glass steady. All those years of being told I was foolish for pursuing writing, all those condescending comments from my father about how business is in the male genes, all of Victoria's sneers about my little hobby, and all along it was grandmother's writing and publishing that had built the family fortune. But the revelations didn't stop there. The ribbon told of secret bank accounts, of shares in the publishing company hidden under various trusts, of a safety deposit box at First National Bank that contained documents that would prove everything. And then, the line that changed everything. "I leave the real inheritance to you, Emma, because you are the only one who understood that money without purpose is just paper. The typewriter is the key. Look beneath the felt in the case." My fingers fumbled as I lifted the typewriter out completely and peeled back the felt lining at the bottom of the case. There, sealed in plastic, was a small brass key and a business card for a lawyer I'd never heard of. Not the family lawyer who had read the will, but someone named Margaret Chen at a firm in Manhattan. It was past 9 in the evening, but I couldn't wait. I called the number on the card, expecting to get voicemail. Instead, a warm voice answered on the second ring. "Miss Sinclair, I've been expecting your call. Your grandmother said you would find the message eventually. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? There are some documents you need to see." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw grandmother's face, remembered all the times she had winked at me when father dismissed my writing, all the moments she had squeezed my hand when Victoria's cruelty cut too deep. She had been trying to tell me something all along, and I had been too consumed by my own insecurities to see it. The next morning, I put on my best outfit, a simple black dress I'd bought for job interviews, and took the subway to Manhattan. Margaret Chen's office was in a building I'd walked past 1,000 times, one of those gorgeous pre-war structures with brass fixtures and marble floors. Her office was on the 15th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Margaret Chen herself was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and eyes that reminded me of grandmother's, sharp, intelligent, missing nothing. "Your grandmother was an extraordinary woman," she said, as she gestured for me to sit. "I've been managing her private affairs for 20 years, separate from your family's usual legal counsel. She insisted on complete discretion." She pulled out a thick folder from her desk drawer. "Your grandmother began transferring assets to a trust in your name 5 years ago, when you decided to pursue writing. She saw something in you that reminded her of herself, not just the love of words, but the courage to choose your own path despite the criticism." The numbers on the documents didn't make sense at first. I had to read them 3 times before the reality sank in. The trust contained shares in Ashford Publishing House worth approximately $15 million. There were also royalties from dozens of books published under various pseudonyms, properties in New York and London that grandmother had purchased with her publishing profits, and a literary foundation she had established to help young female writers. "But the will," I stammered. "Victoria got everything, the house, the money, the jewelry." Margaret smiled, a knowing expression that reminded me so much of grandmother, it made my chest ache. Your sister inherited what your grandmother wanted the world to see, the facade of wealth that your grandfather supposedly built. The $200,000? That was from your grandfather's estate. The jewelry, family heirlooms from his side, the beach house, purchased in his name with his money, what little he had. But the real fortune, the empire your grandmother built with her own hands and mind, that was never part of the public will. She handed me another document. Your grandmother also left you this, a letter to be delivered with the inheritance. She wanted you to read it when you were ready. The letter was longer than the ribbon message, written in grandmother's careful script. My dearest Emma, by now you know the truth. I built an empire in silence, let others take credit for my achievements, and smiled while your father and sister dismissed the very talents that created their comfortable lives. I did this because it was the only way a woman of my generation could succeed without destroying her family. But times have changed, my dear one. You don't have to hide. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to accept their diminishment of your dreams. I watched you these past years, saw how you internalized their criticism, how you began to believe you were less than Victoria because you chose art over arithmetic. Every time you apologized for being a writer, every time you accepted their mockery with a bowed head, my heart broke a little more because I saw myself in you. But I also saw the chance for something I never had, the freedom to be yourself openly. The publishing house is yours now, not just the shares, but the legacy. There are manuscripts in the vault that I wrote but never published, stories that were too bold for their time but might find their audience now. There are connections with authors and agents who knew my secret and kept it. There are opportunities I created but could never fully grasp. But more than that, there is vindication. You were never the failure, Emma. You were the only one who inherited what truly mattered, the gift of seeing stories in everything, of understanding that words can change the world. Your father will be shocked. Victoria will be furious. They will say I was senile, that I was manipulated, that this isn't what I really wanted. Let them. Margaret has recordings of every conversation, documents signed and witnessed over years. The inheritance is ironclad. But here's what I need you to understand. This isn't about revenge. It's about truth. It's about making sure that at least one woman in our family doesn't have to hide her light under a bushel of others' expectations. The typewriter was my first purchase with my own money, bought the day I sold my first story in 1942. Every important document I ever wrote was composed on those keys. It has been my silent companion through decades of secret success. Now it's yours, along with everything else I couldn't give you while I was alive. Don't hide, my dear Emma. Don't diminish yourself. And whatever you do, don't let them make you feel guilty for inheriting what was always meant to be yours. Write your stories. Publish them boldly. Build on what I started, but do it in the light where everyone can see. All my love and faith, Grandmother Rose. I sat in that office for what felt like hours, tears streaming down my face, the letter clutched in my hands. Margaret tactfully busied herself with paperwork, giving me time to process everything. When I finally looked up, she handed me a tissue and a glass of water. "There's more," she said gently. "Your grandmother wanted you to see the publishing house offices. She maintained a private office there that no one in your family knows about. Would you like to go today?" The Ashford Publishing House occupied 3 floors of a building in Midtown with a brass plaque by the elevator that I'd walked past dozens of times without ever really seeing. The receptionist, a young man with kind eyes, seemed to recognize me immediately. "Ms. Sinclair, we've been expecting you." Mrs. Chen called ahead. The private elevator opened directly into an office that took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with first editions of every book Ashford had ever published. The 4th wall was entirely windows, looking out over the city, and there, in the center of the room, sat an exact replica of the typewriter Grandmother had left me. She worked here every Tuesday and Thursday. The receptionist, James, he introduced himself, explained. told her family she was at her bridge club. She read every manuscript personally, made every major decision. The official CEO, Mr. Brennan, he was essentially her proxy. He's eager to meet with you whenever you're ready. On the desk was a stack of manuscripts with a note on top. Emma, these are the stories I wrote, but never had the courage to publish under my own name. Perhaps you'll be braver than I was. Gr. I spent the rest of the day in that office, reading grandmother's unpublished work. They were stories of women who defied expectations, who built their own paths, who refused to be diminished. They were, I realized, the stories she had lived but could never tell. That evening, I returned to my tiny apartment in Queens, my mind reeling from everything I'd learned. I sat at my card table, looking at the typewriter, and made a decision. I would tell Victoria and my father the truth, but not yet. First, I had work to do. Over the next 2 weeks, I quietly educated myself about the publishing business. Mr. Brennan, who turned out to be a kind 70-year-old man who had worked with grandmother for 30 years, walked me through everything. He showed me the accounts, the author relationships, the upcoming publications. He also showed me something else, a file grandmother had kept on Victoria and my father's business dealings. Your grandmother was no fool, he said carefully. She knew your father's investment firm was struggling. She knew Victoria had been making questionable trades. She kept track of everything, in case she ever needed to protect the family from their poor decisions. The file was damning. My father had been borrowing against assets he didn't actually own, assuming his eventual inheritance from grandmother would cover the debts. Victoria had been insider trading, using information from father's clients to make personal investments. They were both one audit away from federal investigation. Your grandmother knew? I asked, stunned. She knew everything, Brennan confirmed, but she hoped they would correct their courses on their own. She left you the power to decide what to do with this information. I thought about all the years of humiliation, all the family dinners where I was mocked for my career choice, while they committed actual crimes in their glass towers. I thought about grandmother, building an empire while pretending to be nothing more than a society wife. And I made my decision. The family dinner was scheduled for the following Sunday. It was a monthly tradition at my parents' house in Westchester, and attendance was mandatory. I usually dreaded these gatherings, but this time I arrived early, carrying a box of documents and my grandmother's typewriter. "What's that doing here?" Victoria asked when she saw the typewriter, her voice dripping with disdain. "Planning to write the great American novel between courses?" "Actually," I said, setting it carefully on the sideboard, "I thought everyone should see grandmother's most precious possession." "Precious?" My father scoffed, pouring himself a scotch. "It's an old typewriter, Emma. Your sister's inheritance could buy 1,000 of those." "Could it?" I asked innocently. "Could it buy the typewriter that built Ashford Publishing House?" The room went silent. Victoria laughed nervously. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out the first document, the incorporation papers for Ashford Publishing, with grandmother's signature as founder. Grandmother built a publishing empire worth approximately $200 million. She wrote under 17 different pseudonyms, published over 300 books, and revolutionized the publishing industry, all while pretending to be nothing more than grandfather's devoted wife. "That's impossible," my father said, his face paling. "Father built the family fortune. His investments failed in 1963. I interrupted, pulling out more documents. "Grandmother bailed him out with her publishing profits. She saved this family from bankruptcy and never said a word about it." Victoria snatched one of the documents from my hands, her eyes scanning it frantically. "This has to be fake. Grandmother didn't... She couldn't have..." "She could and she did," I said firmly. "And she left it all to me. The publishing house, the properties, the royalties, everything. The real inheritance." "You?" Victoria's voice rose to a shriek. "You're lying. I got the inheritance. The money, the jewelry, the house." "You got grandfather's inheritance," I corrected. $200,000 and some family heirlooms. Grandmother's fortune, the one she built herself, was never part of the public will." My father had collapsed into a chair, his scotch forgotten. "This can't be legal. We'll contest it. You manipulated her." "The way you manipulated your clients' portfolios?" I asked quietly, pulling out another set of documents. "Or the way Victoria manipulated the stock market with insider information?" The color drained from both their faces. Victoria's hands started shaking. "How did you—" "Grandmother knew everything," I said. "She documented everything. She left me the choice of what to do with that information." I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "Here's what's going to happen. You're both going to resign from your positions at the investment firm. You're going to return any illegally obtained profits to a charity of my choosing, and you're going to stop, immediately and permanently, treating me like I'm less than you." "You can't threaten us," Victoria hissed, but her voice lacked its usual venom. "I'm not threatening you," I replied calmly. "I'm offering you the same chance Grandmother offered you, to correct your course on your own. The alternative is that I turn these documents over to the SEC and let them sort it out." My father looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. "You would destroy your own family? The way you tried to destroy my self-worth?" I asked. "The way you made me feel like a failure for choosing the very profession that built this family's fortune?" "No, Father, I'm not destroying anything. I'm just finally telling the truth." My mother, who had been silent throughout this entire exchange, finally spoke. "Rose knew? All these years, she knew what she had built, and she let us believe? She let you believe what you wanted to believe," I said, my voice softening slightly. "She protected this family's reputation even when it meant erasing her own achievements. She sat through decades of dinners where Father praised Grandfather's business acumen, knowing it was her work being celebrated. She watched Victoria mock me for being a writer, while knowing it was her writing that paid for Victoria's education, her car, her entire life." I moved to the typewriter, running my fingers over the keys. "She gave me the only thing in the will that mattered, the tool she used to build everything. Everyone else saw it as worthless. But Grandmother knew I would understand its value." "This is insane," Victoria said, but her voice was weak, defeated. You can't just come in here and upend everything." "I'm not upending anything," I replied. "I'm just stepping into the light, the way Grandmother never could. I'm going to run Ashford Publishing House. I'm going to publish Grandmother's hidden manuscripts under her real name. And I'm going to continue building what she started. But I'm going to do it openly, proudly, without hiding behind anyone else's name." The room was silent for a long moment. Then my mother stood up, walked over to me, and did something she hadn't done in years. She hugged me. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she whispered. "I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner." One by one, the reality sank in for each of them. Victoria, realizing her entire worldview had been built on a lie. My father, understanding that his dismissal of women's capabilities had blinded him to the truth about his own mother. And my mother, recognizing that she had stood by while her daughter was diminished for the very talents that had sustained the family for generations. "What happens now?" my father asked finally, his voice hollow. "Now you have a choice," I said. "You can accept the truth, make amends for your actions, and we can move forward as a family that's honest with each other, or you can fight me and lose everything, not just the money, but your freedom." Victoria looked at the documents spread across the table, evidence of her crimes in black and white. "You would really send us to prison?" "I would really hold you accountable," I corrected. "Something Grandmother was too kind to do. But I'm not Grandmother. I'm not going to hide in the shadows and let you take credit for my work. I'm not going to sit at the children's table while you mock my dreams. And I'm certainly not going to let you continue breaking the law while acting morally superior to me." The negotiations took 3 hours. In the end, they agreed to everything: the resignations, the restitution, the promise to cease their derision. Victoria had to sell her penthouse to pay back her illegally gained profits. Father had to close the investment firm and take a job as a junior analyst at another company, starting over at 63. It was humiliating for them, but it was better than prison. But I wasn't done with just the legal aspects. I had one more requirement. Every family, dinner from now on, we're going to talk about grandmother's real legacy. We're going to acknowledge what she built. And Victoria, you're going to read at least one book from Ashford Publishing House each month and discuss it intelligently at dinner. You can't force me to read, Victoria protested weakly. No, but I can make your continued freedom contingent on you developing the literacy to appreciate what actually built your privileged life, I replied. The transformation of my life after that dinner was swift and profound. I moved out of my studio apartment and into grandmother's real home. Not the Westchester house that had been grandfather's, but a brownstone in Greenwich Village that she had bought with her first major publishing success. It had been maintained by a management company for years, waiting. The house was filled with her real life, manuscripts, letters from authors, photographs of her at publishing events where she had pretended to be just another guest while actually running everything from behind the scenes. In her study, I found journals dating back to 1942, documenting every story she wrote, every deal she made, every moment of frustration at having to hide her intelligence and ambition. One entry, dated just a month before her death, was addressed to me. Emma will find this someday, and I hope she understands. I don't regret the choices I made. They were the only choices available to a woman of my time who wanted both a family and a career. But I regret that my silence contributed to an environment where my granddaughter was made to feel small for possessing the very gifts I had to hide. The money, the publishing house, the properties. They're just things. What I really leave her is permission. Permission to be brilliant openly. Permission to succeed without apology. Permission to write stories that change the world and put her name on them in bold letters. I had the entry framed and hung it in my office at Ashford Publishing House, right next to a photograph Margaret Chen had given me. Grandmother at her typewriter in that very office, taken by a secretary who had known her secret. In the photo, she's smiling, her fingers poised over the keys, looking directly at the camera with an expression of fierce joy. It was the real her, the one the family never saw. The first book I published as head of Ashford was grandmother's memoir, titled The Woman in the Shadows, A Publisher's Hidden Life. I wrote the introduction myself, telling the story of finding the message on the typewriter ribbon, of discovering the truth about our family's fortune. The book became an instant bestseller, with book clubs across the country discussing not just grandmother's story, but the stories of all the women who had been forced to hide their achievements behind men's names. Victoria, to my surprise, became one of the book's most vocal champions. The experience of losing everything she thought she had earned and realizing it had all been built on someone else's hidden labor had profoundly changed her. She started attending the family dinners with actual enthusiasm, bringing insights from the books she'd read, asking questions about the publishing process. One evening, 6 months after the confrontation, she pulled me aside. "I'm sorry," she said, and for the first time in our lives, she seemed to mean it. "I spent so many years believing that success meant crushing others, that there was only room for one of us to shine. Grandmother had enough light for all of us, and I was too blinded by my own ego to see it." "She would forgive you," I said. "She forgave all of us for not seeing her." "But do you?" Victoria asked, her voice small. "Do you forgive me for all those years?" I thought about it for a long moment. "I'm working on it. Every day I'm working on it." The publishing house thrived under my leadership. I implemented programs for young female writers, offering mentorships and advances that allowed them to focus on their craft without having to hide behind pseudonyms or male co-authors. I published stories that major houses considered too female-focused or too niche, and watched them become bestsellers. I proved over and over that grandmother had been right. Words have power, more power than money could ever have. But the most meaningful change was in how I saw myself. The girl who had sat at the children's table, who had apologized for her dreams, who had accepted mockery as her due, she was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who understood that she had inherited not just money, but a legacy of hidden strength waiting to be revealed. I kept the typewriter in my office, using it occasionally to write letters to authors or special notes to readers. Every time I touched those keys, I thought of grandmother, alone in her secret office, building an empire one word at a time. But unlike her, I didn't have to hide. I could put my name on my work, speak at publishing conferences, be interviewed about my vision for the company. I could be visible in all the ways she couldn't. One day, about a year after inheriting everything, I was sorting through more of grandmother's papers when I found a safety deposit box key taped to the back of a picture frame. The photo was of me at my college graduation, holding my creative writing degree, smiling despite knowing my family thought it was worthless. On the back, grandmother had written, "The one who knew her worth all along." The safety deposit box contained something unexpected, not more money or documents, but hundreds of letters. Letters from women who had worked with grandmother over the years, who had known her secret and kept it. Letters thanking her for publishing their work when no one else would, for paying them fairly, for treating them as equals in an industry that didn't. Letters that revealed a network of women who had supported each other in silence, building careers and fortunes while the world believed they were just secretaries and assistants. One letter from a woman named Dorothy Brennan, Mr. Brennan's mother, as it turned out, particularly stood out. "Rose, your granddaughter Emma came to the office today. You were right about her. She has your spirit, but not your need to hide it. The world is ready for her in a way it wasn't ready for us. Thank you for ensuring she'll never have to make the choices we did." The typewriter was a perfect touch. Only someone who truly understands the power of words would see its value. I realized then that grandmother's gift to me wasn't just the inheritance. It was the revelation that I had never been alone in my struggles, that generations of women before me had fought the same battles, just more quietly. The typewriter wasn't just a key to hidden fortune, it was a symbol of all the stories that had been typed in shadow, waiting for someone to bring them into the light. I started a project to find and publish the works of all the women in grandmother's network who had written under pseudonyms or ghostwritten for male authors. It became a 10-volume series called The Hidden Library, and each book's introduction told the real story of its author. The series won numerous awards and sparked a nationwide conversation about women's contributions to literature that had been erased or minimized. My father, meanwhile, struggled with his new reality. Going from CEO to junior analyst was a blow to his ego that took months to recover from. But slowly, he began to actually learn the business instead of just pretending to know it. One evening, he called me into his study, a much smaller one now, in the modest apartment he and mother had moved to after selling the Westchester house to pay his debts. "I've been thinking about mother," he said, staring at a photograph of grandmother on his desk. "All those years, she must have wanted to tell me the truth. Every time I praised father's business acumen, every time I dismissed women's capabilities in business, she must have wanted to scream. But she didn't," I said. "She loved you more than she loved her own recognition." "That's not love," he said quietly. "That's sacrifice, and I forced her to make it by being too arrogant to see the truth." "You can see it now," I offered. He nodded slowly. "Your mother has started writing, you know. Poetry. She's quite good." "I know," I said. "I'm publishing her collection next month." His eyes widened. "You are?" "Under her own name," I confirmed. "No hiding. No pretending, just truth." The book launch for Mother's poetry collection was held at the Ashford Publishing House offices. It was the first time the entire family had been in that space together. Victoria gave a speech about how the poems had helped her understand the cost of silence. Father spoke about learning to see the women in his life as complete people, not supporting characters in his story. And Mother, standing at the podium where grandmother had stood in secret so many times, read a poem she had written about inherited silence and chosen voice. But the most powerful moment came when Mrs. Chen, Margaret's mother, who was 93 and had been grandmother's first secretary at the publishing house, stood up to speak. "Rose Sinclair hired me in 1951, she said, her voice still strong despite her age. I was a young Chinese woman in New York, and no one would give me a real job. But Rose saw my potential. She taught me to read contracts, to negotiate deals, to recognize good writing. She paid for my daughter Margaret to go to law school. She built a network of women who supported each other in an industry that wanted to exclude us, and she did it all while pretending to be just a housewife. Emma," she turned to me, "your grandmother would be so proud to see you standing here openly, claiming the legacy she built. You're not just inheriting her fortune, you're completing her revolution." That night, I sat in grandmother's office, my office now, with the typewriter in front of me. I inserted a fresh ribbon, the old one carefully preserved in a climate-controlled display case we'd installed in the office lobby, along with the story of how it had revealed the truth. I began typing a letter to grandmother, knowing she'd never read it, but needing to write it anyway. "Dear Grandmother Rose, the truth is out now, all of it. The publishing house, the fortune, the decades of hiding, everyone knows. But more importantly, everyone knows why you did it. You weren't weak for hiding. You were strategic. You were playing a long game that I was always meant to finish." Victoria reads now. Really reads, not just skims business reports. She's discovered she loves mystery novels, especially the ones by Dorothy Sayers, one of your pseudonyms I discovered. Father has learned humility, perhaps too late, but learned it nonetheless. Mother has found her voice in poetry, writing about the years of silence she didn't even realize she was keeping. And me? I'm the publisher you always wanted to be. I sit in board meetings and make decisions openly. I champion women's voices without apology. I refuse to diminish myself or anyone else. I am visible in all the ways you couldn't be. But here's what I want you to know. I understand now that your invisibility was not weakness. It was the foundation that made my visibility possible. You didn't hide because you were afraid. You hid because you were building something bigger than recognition. You were building a future where your granddaughter wouldn't have to hide. The typewriter sits on my desk now, next to a computer that can do in seconds what took you hours. But I still use it sometimes, feeling the weight of the keys, hearing the satisfying click of letters striking paper. It reminds me that every word has weight, every story matters, and sometimes the most powerful truths are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to look closer. Thank you for the inheritance, not the money, though that has allowed me to do so much good, but the permission to be myself fully and openly. Thank you for showing me that power isn't always loud, that strength can be quiet, and that sometimes the best revenge against those who diminish you is to succeed so thoroughly that your success becomes undeniable. The publishing house has doubled in value since I took over. We've published 73 books by debut female authors this year alone. Your memoir has been optioned for a film, and I've insisted they show the truth. All of it, including the painful parts where your own son dismissed the very talents that built his comfortable life. But my greatest achievement, I think, is this. Last week, a young woman came to my office. She was 22, fresh out of college with a creative writing degree, carrying a manuscript her family had mocked her for writing. She reminded me of myself 5 years ago, talented but beaten down, brilliant but dimmed by others' dismissal. I published her book. It comes out next month, and when it does, her name will be on the cover in letters so bold they can be seen from across a bookstore. That's your real legacy, grandmother. Not the millions, not the publishing house, not even the vindication of finally being seen. Your legacy is every woman who now knows she doesn't have to choose between success and visibility, between family and ambition, between her truth and others' comfort. I wish you could see it. But somehow, I think you knew this would happen. You planned it all, down to the message on the typewriter ribbon that only I would be patient enough to decode. You knew that the girl everyone dismissed as a dreamer would be the one to bring your dreams into the light. I love you. I miss you, and I promise to keep building on the foundation you laid, but I'll do it with my name on every brick. Your granddaughter, Emma P.S. I'm changing the name of the publishing house next month. It will now be called Rose and Ashford Publishing, giving you the recognition you always deserved. Victoria suggested it. She said it was the least we could do to honor the woman who gave us everything while asking for nothing in return. I pulled the letter from the typewriter, folded it carefully, and placed it in the safe where I kept grandmother's most precious documents. Then I looked around the office, my office, built by her hands, but claimed by my voice, and smiled. The next morning brought a new challenge. A man named Harrison Ashford III, grandson of the founder of Ashford Publishing House, had seen the news about grandmother's memoir and was threatening to sue for defamation. He arrived at my office with a team of lawyers demanding to see proof of grandmother's claims. I was ready for him. I had boxes of documents, contracts with grandmothers, signature, correspondence between her and authors, bank records showing payments from her personal accounts to keep the publishing house afloat in its early years. But the most damning evidence was a series of letters between Harrison Ashford Sr. and my grandmother, where he explicitly acknowledged her as the true owner and himself as merely a figurehead. "This is impossible," Harrison III sputtered, reading his grandfather's own words. "My family's entire reputation was built on my grandmother's work," I finished. "Just like my family's fortune. The difference is, I'm willing to acknowledge it." His lawyers advised him to drop the threat of a lawsuit. The evidence was overwhelming, and pursuing it would only bring more attention to his family's role in erasing a woman's achievements. But Harrison III couldn't let it go. "Do you have any idea what this will do to my family's standing?" he demanded. "The same thing your grandfather did to my grandmother's standing," I replied evenly, "except she had to live with it. Your family just has to live with the truth." He left, defeated, but not before saying something that stuck with me. "Your grandmother could have exposed us at any time. Why didn't she?" "Because she was building something more important than revenge," I answered. "She was building a future where the truth could finally matter." The memoir's publication sparked a movement. Women across the country began investigating their own family histories, discovering how many of their grandmothers and great-grandmothers had hidden their achievements behind men's names. The hashtag #HiddenLegacy trended for weeks, with thousands of stories of women whose contributions had been erased or minimized. I was invited to speak at universities, publishing conferences, women's leadership summits. Every time I brought the typewriter with me, setting it on the podium as a reminder that sometimes the most valuable inheritances look worthless to those who don't understand their true worth. At one such event, a young woman approached me afterward, tears in her eyes. "My family thinks I'm wasting my life trying to be a writer," she said. "They keep telling me to be practical, to get a real job. But your story, your grandmother's story, it makes me think maybe I'm not crazy." "You're not crazy," I assured her. "You're a writer, and that's one of the most powerful things you can be. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I gave her my card, told her to send me her manuscript. 6 months later, we published her debut novel. It won 3 literary awards and proved to her family that words could indeed pay the bills. But not every outcome was positive. The revelation of Victoria's insider trading, even though she had made restitution, had destroyed her reputation in the business world. She couldn't get a job anywhere in finance. For someone who had defined herself entirely by her corporate success, it was devastating. One evening, she showed up at my apartment, the brownstone that had been grandmother's real home, with a bottle of wine and red-rimmed eyes. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted, curled up on the couch that grandmother had probably sat on while planning her publishing empire. "My whole life I thought I was the successful one. I thought you were the failure, and now I'm unemployable, and you're running a multi-million-dollar company." "You're not defined by your job," I said gently, pouring her a glass of wine. Easy for you to say, she replied bitterly. You have a job, a purpose. What do I have? I thought for a moment, then made a decision that surprised both of us. You have a good eye for patterns and trends. You understand markets, even if you use that understanding illegally. What if you use those skills differently? What do you mean? Come work with me at the publishing house, not in finance. You can't do that anymore. But in acquisitions. Help me identify trends in reading, find the next big genres, spot the manuscripts that will sell. Victoria stared at me. You would trust me? After everything? Grandmother believed in second chances, I said. She gave Father decades of them. Maybe it's time I gave you one. Victoria started the next week as a junior acquisitions editor, the lowest position in the department. It was humbling for someone who had once managed million-dollar portfolios, but she threw herself into it with surprising dedication. She read voraciously, attended every editorial meeting, learned the business from the ground up, and she was good at it. Her ability to spot patterns translated well to identifying emerging trends in literature. Within 6 months, she had discovered 3 debut authors who became bestsellers. She found her purpose not in crushing others, but in lifting new voices. Father, too, had found an unexpected peace in his reduced circumstances. Without the pressure of maintaining a facade of success, he began to actually enjoy his work. He became known at his new firm as someone who genuinely understood risk assessment, who could spot potential problems others missed, skills he'd developed, ironically, from years of hiding his own failures. One Sunday dinner, now held in my brownstone instead of the Westchester house, he raised his glass for a toast. To Mother, he said, looking at Grandmother's portrait on the wall. Who built an empire we didn't deserve to inherit but are trying to deserve now? To Grandmother, Victoria added, who saw our worst selves and loved us anyway. To Rose, Mother continued, who gave us the gift of truth, even when it hurt. To the woman who hid so we could shine, I finished. We drank, and for the first time in my life, Sunday dinner felt like a real family gathering instead of a performance of superiority. The typewriter became something of a legend in publishing circles. I had it displayed in the lobby of the Rose and Ashford building in a custom case with climate control and security systems. Next to it, we installed a plaque that told the story, the hidden message on the ribbon, the decades of secret success, the inheritance that looked like nothing but meant everything. Writers would come to see it like a pilgrimage, touching the glass case for luck before their book launches. Students would take selfies with it, posting about the power of looking closer, of not accepting surface judgments. It became a symbol not just of Grandmother's story, but of all the hidden stories waiting to be discovered. One day, while giving a tour to a group of young writers, one of them asked me a question that stopped me cold. Do you think your grandmother was happy? I thought about it for a long time before answering. I think she found joy in her work, pride in her achievements, and satisfaction in her secret success. But I don't think she was fully happy, because happiness requires being seen and known for who you really are. She gave that up so that future generations wouldn't have to. That's sad, the young writer said. Yes, I agreed. But it's also powerful. She turned her sacrifice into a gift. She transformed her silence into our voices. 3 years after inheriting the publishing house, we had our biggest success yet. A manuscript Grandmother had written but never published, a multi-generational saga about women in publishing, won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I accepted the award on her behalf, bringing the typewriter with me to the ceremony. In my acceptance speech, I said, "This typewriter produced words that changed lives, built fortunes, and challenged conventions. But for decades, those words had to hide behind other names, other faces, other stories. Today, we honor not just Rose Sinclair's work, but the work of every woman who had to choose between recognition and success, between family and ambition, between truth and survival. This award belongs to all of them." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, but perhaps the most meaningful moment came later that night. At the after-party, Harrison Ashford III approached me, looking uncomfortable but determined. "I owe you an apology," he said. "And more than that, I owe your grandmother an apology I can never give. My grandfather knew what he was doing. We all knew, on some level. We just chose to believe the comfortable lie instead of the uncomfortable truth." "We all did," I admitted, "even her own family." "But you looked closer," he said. "You found the truth because you were willing to see it. That takes courage." "No," I corrected. "It takes love. I loved her enough to want to know who she really was, not just who she pretended to be." He nodded, then handed me an envelope. "I found these in my grandfather's papers. Letters from your grandmother. I think you should have them." The letters were extraordinary. Grandmother's unfiltered thoughts about the publishing industry, her frustrations with having to hide, her dreams for what the company could become if she could run it openly. But the most powerful line was in the last letter, dated just a year before her death. "I've realized that my invisibility is not my tragedy but my strategy. Every book I publish under another name, every success I cannot claim, every achievement I must hide, they are all seeds I'm planting for a garden I'll never see. But my granddaughter will. Emma will walk in that garden openly, in full sunlight, and she will know that I planted it for her." I framed that letter and hung it in my office next to her photograph. It reminds me every day that I'm not just running a publishing house. I'm tending a garden that was planted in darkness, but was always meant to bloom in light. The revelation of grandmother's story had ripple effects throughout the publishing industry. Other publishing houses began investigating their own histories, discovering how many had been secretly run or influenced by women whose contributions had been erased. It led to an industry-wide reckoning and a commitment to not just publishing more women, but ensuring they received proper credit for their work. I used the platform to establish the Rose Sinclair Foundation, which provided grants to female writers and helped uncover and publish the hidden works of women throughout literary history. The foundation's first project was to republish all of grandmother's pseudonymous works under her real name, with introductions explaining the context in which they were written. Victoria, who had become one of our best acquisitions editors, suggested we create an imprint specifically for recovered works by women. We called it Hidden Voices, and it became one of our most successful ventures, both commercially and critically. "You know," Victoria said one day as we reviewed submissions, "I spent so many years thinking success meant being the only one at the top. Grandmother knew better. She knew success meant building something that could lift others." "She also knew that real power isn't always visible," I added. "Sometimes it's the hand that signs the checks in the back room while someone else takes the bow on stage." "But you're changing that," Victoria pointed out. "You're signing the checks and taking the bows." "Because she made it possible," I said. "Every visible success I have is built on her invisible sacrifice." 5 years after finding the message on the typewriter ribbon, I stood in front of that same typewriter, now permanently displayed in what we had renamed the Rose Sinclair Memorial Library within the publishing house. A group of high school students on a field trip listened as I told the story again, the story I'd told hundreds of times, but never tired of sharing. "The lesson isn't just about hidden inheritance or secret fortunes," I explained. "It's about looking closer. It's about questioning the stories we're told about who built what, who deserves credit, who has value. It's about understanding that sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones who've been trained to be invisible." One student raised her hand. "But why didn't she just tell the truth? Why hide for so long?" "Because the world wasn't ready for her truth," I answered. "But she made sure it would be ready for ours. She played a long game, sacrificing her recognition for our opportunity. Every word she typed on this machine was an act of rebellion disguised as compliance." After the students left, I sat alone in the library, looking at the typewriter. I thought about all the words it had produced, all the stories it had told, all the secrets it had kept. And I thought about grandmother, alone in this very building, typing stories that would change the world while pretending she was at her bridge club. "We did it, grandmother. I whispered to the empty room. We brought it all into the light. That evening, I received a call from Margaret Chen. She was retiring and wanted to pass on one final piece of information from grandmother's files. "There's one more account," she said. "Your grandmother set it up for a very specific purpose. She wanted it released to you only after you had proven yourself capable of running the publishing house successfully for 5 years. That time has come." The account contained another fortune, but this one came with specific instructions. It was to be used to establish a university, the Rose Sinclair University for Women's Literature and Publishing. Grandmother had already purchased the land, had architectural plans drawn up, had even begun recruiting faculty in secret. "She really did think of everything," I said, stunned by the scope of her planning. "She had decades to plan," Margaret reminded me. "Every slight against you, every dismissive comment about women's capabilities, every moment she had to bite her tongue, she channeled it all into building this future." The university opened 2 years later. Victoria gave the keynote address at the opening ceremony, talking about how education without recognition was like a tree falling in an empty forest. It might make a sound, but no one would hear it. "My grandmother's trees fell in silence for decades," she said, "but my sister Emma made sure we all heard the echo." Father, who had finally worked his way back up to a senior position through honest work, announced that he would be teaching a course at the university on ethical business practices, using his own failures as case studies. "I can't undo the years I dismissed women's contributions," he said at the announcement. "But I can make sure the next generation of business leaders doesn't make the same mistake." Mother became the university's first poet in residence, teaching courses on finding your voice after silence. Her second poetry collection, titled The Inheritance of Truth, became required reading in women's studies programs across the country. But the most powerful moment came when we unveiled the statue in the university's main courtyard. It wasn't a statue of grandmother, as everyone expected. Instead, it was a bronze typewriter with blank paper loaded, ready for the next story. The plaque read, "For all the stories yet to be told by women who refuse to hide." At the unveiling, an elderly woman approached me. She was in her 90s, walking with a cane but with eyes still sharp and clear. "I knew your grandmother," she said. "We worked together in the 1950s. I was one of her ghostwriters. She paid me fairly, treated me with respect, and never once took credit for my work, even though she could have. She told me that someday women wouldn't have to hide their talents. I didn't believe her then. But looking at all this," she gestured to the university, "the crowds of young women writers, the publishing house executives who were mostly female, I believe her now." She handed me a manuscript. "I wrote this in 1954. Your grandmother wanted to publish it, but I was too scared. I'm 94 now. I'm not scared anymore." We published her book the following year. She did her first book tour at 95, telling packed audiences about the days when women writers had to choose between their names and their work. She became a symbol of all the voices that had been silenced but refused to stay quiet forever. The typewriter ribbon, the one that had revealed everything, was eventually donated to the Smithsonian as part of an exhibit on women's hidden contributions to American arts and letters. I flew to Washington for the opening, bringing the typewriter itself for a special display. Standing in that museum, watching people read the painstaking translation of the ribbon's message, seeing their faces change as they understood what it meant, I felt grandmother's presence more strongly than I had since finding her message. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, tugged on my sleeve. "Did your grandma really hide all that?" she asked, eyes wide. "She did," I confirmed. "But why?" I knelt down to her level. "Because sometimes, when the world isn't ready for your truth, you have to plant seeds for a future that is. She hid so that I wouldn't have to, and I'm visible so that you won't even have to think about hiding." The girl nodded solemnly, then asked, "Can I touch the typewriter?" "Of course," I said, lifting her up so she could reach the keys through the protective barrier. "Every writer should know what it feels like to touch history." She pressed a single key, the letter R for Rose. The click echoed through the museum hall, a sound that had once been silenced but now rang out clear and true. 10 years after finding the message, I published my own book, not through Rose and Ashford to avoid any conflict of interest, but through another publisher who had competed fiercely for the manuscript. It was the story of grandmother and the typewriter, but more than that, it was the story of all the women who had built things in silence, who had created wealth and art and change while being told they were incapable of such things. The book tour took me around the world. In every city, women came forward with their own stories of grandmothers and great-aunts who had built businesses, written books, invented products, all while letting others take the credit. The typewriter story had become a catalyst for a global recognition of women's hidden contributions. In London, I met with the descendants of one of grandmother's pseudonym's supposed authors, a man who had claimed to write a series of mystery novels that were actually grandmother's work. His family had discovered the truth after reading my book and cross-referencing dates and handwriting. "We're ashamed," his granddaughter told me, "but we're also grateful to finally know the truth. We've decided to donate all the royalties we received from those books to your foundation." "Grandmother wouldn't want that," I said. "She made her choices freely, but perhaps we could use those funds to establish a scholarship for young women writers." We called it the Truth in Fiction Scholarship, and it became one of the most prestigious awards for emerging female writers. Victoria, who had risen to become editorial director at Rose and Ashford, launched a project to identify and republish every work by women that had been published under male pseudonyms in the past century. It was a massive undertaking, requiring a team of researchers and historians, but it became her life's work. "I spent so many years tearing other women down," she told me one evening as we worked late in the office. "Now I want to spend the rest of my life lifting them up." "Grandmother would be proud," I said. "Of you," Victoria replied. "She would be proud of you. You did what she couldn't. You brought it all to light." "We brought it to light," I corrected. "All of us, even the ones who resisted at first. Change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens because enough people decide to look closer, to question the stories they've been told, to value what's been dismissed." The typewriter still sits in the Rose and Ashford building, though now it's part of a larger exhibit about the history of women in publishing. Every new employee spends their first day learning about grandmother's story, about the decades of hidden work, about the message on the ribbon that changed everything. And every year, on the anniversary of the day I found that message, I sit down at the typewriter and write a letter to grandmother. I tell her about the new authors we've discovered, the young women who walk through our doors with manuscripts and dreams, never having to wonder if they'll need to hide their names. I tell her about Victoria's transformation, father's humility, mother's voice finally freed. I tell her about the university, the foundation, the scholarships, the global movement her story sparked, but mostly I tell her thank you. Thank you for the inheritance, not the money, though that has done so much good, but the example. Thank you for showing me that power doesn't always announce itself, that strength can be quiet, that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the freedom to be everything you couldn't. The last letter I wrote to her ended with this: "Grandmother, they say I inherited a fortune, but what I really inherited was a revolution. You lit a match in darkness and trusted me to carry the flame into daylight. Every woman who publishes under her own name, every girl who grows up knowing her words have value, every family that learns to see the women who built their comfort, they're all part of your legacy." The typewriter is silent now, a museum piece that children stare at in wonder, unable to imagine a time when words had to be typed one letter at a time, when women had to hide their brilliance, when the truth was something that lived on ribbons instead of in the light. But I remember the girl who sat at the children's table, dismissed and diminished. I remember the woman who built an empire in silence. And I remember the moment when the ribbon revealed its secret and everything changed. You gave me more than wealth, grandmother. You gave me purpose. You gave me permission. You gave me the chance to be visible in all the ways you couldn't. The cash went to Victoria, and she lost it all to her own greed before finding her real worth. But the typewriter came to me, and with it came the truth that set us all free. Thank you for looking at me and seeing not the failure everyone else saw, but the successor you were building. Thank you for the message on the ribbon that changed everything. Your granddaughter, visible and proud, Emma. As I finished typing that letter, I heard footsteps behind me. Victoria stood in the doorway holding a manuscript. "Another one?" I asked. "Another one," she confirmed. "A 90-year-old woman in Idaho. She's been writing under her deceased husband's name for 40 years because she didn't think anyone would publish an old woman's stories." "Well," I said, standing up from the typewriter, "let's prove her wrong." We walked together to the conference room, where our editorial team was waiting. On the wall hung grandmother's portrait, not the formal one from the family home, but the candid shot of her at her typewriter, fingers poised over keys, ready to change the world one word at a time. "She would have loved this," Victoria said softly. "She did love this," I corrected. "She loved it enough to build it in secret, to tend it in silence, to trust that someday we would find it and bring it to light." The meeting began, another author's hidden work about to be revealed, another story saved from silence. And somewhere, I like to think, grandmother was watching, finally able to see her garden in full bloom, every seed she planted now growing in the sun she always knew would come. The typewriter remains in its case, a monument to hidden truths and patient revolutions. But its real legacy isn't in the museum or the university or even the publishing house. Its real legacy is in every woman who tells her story without apology, who signs her name without hesitation, who knows her worth without question. The cash inheritance that went to Victoria is long gone, spent on things that seemed important but proved hollow. But the typewriter inheritance, the truth, the legacy, the permission to be visible, that grows stronger with each passing day, each new voice, each story brought from shadow into light. Grandmother hid so we could seek. She whispered so we could shout. She typed in secret so we could publish proudly. And we do. Every single day, we do.